In our previous videos, we discussed Brandon Biggs's prophetic vision, which pointed to a future where the US dollar would lose value, while assets like precious metals, oil, gas, and cryptocurrencies would rise. We predicted that the change wouldn't happen randomly. It would likely be driven by major policy changes under Trump administration. Well, it seems we were right. On April 5th, 2025, President Trump announced sweeping new tariffs, 10% on all imports, with much higher rates on specific countries like China, Vietnam, and the EU. This move not only shook global markets, but may also set the stage for the exact economic transition Brandon foresaw. Let's break down what this policy means, what kind of impact it's already having, and where the economy could be heading next. On April 5th, 2025, President Donald Trump implemented a comprehensive tariff policy imposing a baseline 10% tariff on imports from all countries, with significantly higher rates for specific nations. China faces a total tariff of 54%, Cambodia 49%, Vietnam 46%, and the European Union 20%. These tariffs are among the highest since the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act of 1930, which exacerbated the Great Depression by prompting international retaliation and collapsing global trade. The administration justifies these measures as efforts to stimulate domestic investment and address perceived trade imbalances. However, the tariffs have already led to significant economic repercussions. Major U.S. stock indices, including the S&P 500, Dow Jones, and Nasdaq, each dropped over 5% following the announcement. Experts warn that these tariffs could raise consumer prices, stoke inflation, and destabilize financial markets. International responses have been swift and retaliatory. China announced a 34% tax on all U.S. imports and condemned the tariffs as unjust and damaging to global trade stability. Canada and Mexico have also imposed retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, targeting key industries such as agriculture and manufacturing. These actions have heightened fears of a global trade war, with potential long-term impacts on international economic relations and domestic economies. Let's break this down with a real-world example. Imagine a $100 luxury fountain pen imported from Paris. Before the new tariffs, the wholesale cost to the US retailer was about $70. The seller would then mark it up by $30, making a nice, clean profit. Simple. But now, with Trump's new 20% tariff on goods from the European Union, that same $70 pen is hit with a $14 import tax, 20% of $70. So the seller's cost rises from $70 to $84. Now, the seller faces a decision. Option 1. Keep the original $100 retail price to stay competitive. But that means the profit shrinks from $30 to just $16. That's nearly a 47% drop in profit. And for many businesses, that's not sustainable. Option 2. Raise the price to keep the original $30 profit margin. To do that, they'd have to sell the pen for $114, 84 cost plus $30 profit. That's a 14% price hike the consumer now has to pay, even though nothing about the pen itself has changed. And that's just one product. Multiply this scenario across thousands of imported items: electronics, clothes, tools, even groceries, and you start to see how tariffs quietly raise prices across the board. Most sellers will choose to protect their margins, meaning higher prices for consumers, and a gradual erosion of the dollar's purchasing power. It's a textbook setup for inflation, exactly the kind of economic shift Brandon's vision pointed to. And remember, that's just a 20% tariff on EU goods. Now take China, which is facing a staggering 54% tariff under the new policy. That means if you import a $100 product from China, say a smartwatch, a power tool, or even basic household items, the importer is now paying $154 just to get it into the US. The extra $54 isn't adding any value to the product. It's not making it better, faster, or higher quality. It's simply the cost of entry. And guess who ends up covering that cost? The consumer. So when you see prices going up, you're not paying more because the product improved. You're overpaying just so it can cross the border. It's an invisible tax that quietly drains consumer wallets while fueling inflation. Again, aligning with Brandon's vision that the dollar's value would go down while the true value of hard assets and commodities would rise. For example, with the new tariffs, the cost to produce a 256GB iPhone 16 Pro could increase from $550 to $820, representing a 49% surge. This escalation in production costs may lead Apple to adjust retail prices accordingly, potentially raising the price of the base iPhone 16 from $799 to approximately $1,500. The iPhone relies heavily on a global supply chain. Its key components are sourced from various countries. The rear camera module is produced in Japan, the processor is manufactured in Taiwan, and a memory chip comes from the United States. Final assembly predominantly takes place in China and other Southeast Asian countries, so it's as expected that just days after the new tariffs were announced, reports began surfacing that American consumers were rushing to make big purchases, especially on imported goods. According to the Spokesman Review, shoppers were hitting car dealerships and appliance stores in large numbers, trying to buy before the tariffs drove prices up. It's a classic case of people reacting to anticipated inflation. If you know something's going to cost more next week, you buy it today. This sudden spike in consumer behavior suggests that the public is taking the tariff news seriously and adjusting their spending accordingly. A similar story was reported by the Associated Press, which described how Americans were scrambling to grab high-ticket items like electronics, home appliances, and even vehicles. Many of these goods rely heavily on imported components or are shipped in from abroad. With tariffs making those imports significantly more expensive, it's no surprise that people rushed to buy before the price hikes took effect. And by the time we finish editing this video, news has broken that yet another 50% tariff is about to be added specifically on Chinese goods. This comes after China became the only country to openly retaliate against the initial US tariffs, despite Trump publicly warning others not to do so. While most countries are either staying quiet or attempting to negotiate behind closed doors, this situation has quickly escalated into a head-to-head economic battle between two of the world's biggest powers. What started as a global tariff move is now beginning to look more like a targeted trade war. It's also worth noting that many countries have already imposed high tariffs on American goods for years. Because of this, some argue that the new US tariffs are simply a way to level the playing field, a form of economic retaliation to give other nations a taste of their own medicine. Looking at existing tariff charts, you'll notice that certain countries have maintained steep import duties on American products, far higher than what the US imposed in return. From this perspective, the move is seen not as aggression, but as an attempt to restore balance in global trade terms, even if the consequences may still be economically disruptive. Now, while the idea behind tariffs is rooted in protecting the domestic economy, it's not without its flaws. The intention is to shield local industries, encouraging American factories to produce more, hire more workers, and reduce dependency on foreign goods. In theory, this creates a stronger, more self-reliant economy. But in practice, things don't always go as planned. For example, while the US can manufacture cars, steel, and some electronics, there are still countless products that can't yet be efficiently produced within the US or don't have viable local alternatives. China, for instance, dominates the global market in low-cost electronics, solar panels, and rare earth materials, which are essential for everything from smartphones to electric vehicles. Taiwan leads in advanced semiconductor manufacturing, while India supplies a massive share of the world's pharmaceutical ingredients. Even everyday items like textiles and home goods often come from countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam, where labor is significantly cheaper. So when heavy tariffs hit these essential imports, businesses and consumers alike are stuck paying more without having a replacement option. That's where the pain sets in, and where inflation begins to creep into every corner of the economy. What's worse is that this tariff hike only affects goods coming into the United States. It doesn't apply to trade happening between other countries. So while the price of imported goods will rise in America, trade between regions like Europe, Asia, and Africa remains untouched. That means countries that once relied on exporting heavily to the US may now pivot and seek new markets elsewhere. As they do, they'll likely form new partnerships and trade agreements to keep their economies running. In short, America may be isolating itself economically, while the rest of the world continues business as usual, just without the US as their main customer. This could gradually shift the balance of global influence and create entirely new economic alliances that bypass the dollar altogether. And remember Brandon's vision? He saw the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa doing something big together. With these new tariffs, some of the long-standing trade relationships the US has enjoyed could start to weaken. Countries that once aligned with America might feel pushed away, especially if it becomes harder or more expensive to do business. In that vacuum, it's no surprise that these nations would turn to one another instead, strengthening alternative alliances like BRICS and forming new systems that don't rely on US influence. So while America tries to protect itself with tariffs, it could unintentionally speed up the formation of a new global economic order, just as Brandon warned. What's even more concerning is that if countries around the world start realizing they can impose tariffs on the US in return, using the same strategy that America is applying to them, the economy could face even bigger consequences. If multiple countries decide to retaliate at once, the situation could quickly spiral. A wave of retaliatory tariffs would make American goods more expensive abroad, damaging exports and further inflating prices at home. This could lead to a massive slowdown in global trade, as countries become more reluctant to engage in the kind of open exchange that has driven economic growth for decades. The US could find itself trapped in a vicious cycle of rising costs, shrinking exports, and growing international isolation, creating an economic environment that's far more volatile and uncertain than before. In the long run, the ripple effects of tariffs and retaliations are likely to push inflation higher across various sectors. As the cost of importing goods rises due to both tariffs and supply chain disruptions, businesses will have no choice but to pass those costs on to consumers. This would lead to price increases in everyday goods, especially imports, from electronics to clothing to food. With the cost of raw materials and components rising, we can also expect metals like copper, aluminum, and steel to increase in price as demand remains high, but the supply is constrained. Oil prices could experience upward pressure as well, particularly if global supply chains tighten and major oil exporting nations like Russia and the Middle East use their resources as leverage. As for the stock market, investors may initially react with volatility, but over time, a prolonged economic slowdown caused by higher tariffs and inflation could lead to weaker corporate earnings, potentially causing a broader market correction. In response to rising inflation, interest rates are likely to rise as well, with the Federal Reserve tightening monetary policy to control inflationary pressures. In the next few months, we could see interest rates climb, further increasing borrowing costs for consumers and businesses alike. Overall, this could create a difficult economic environment, with rising prices in everything from gas to groceries, making it harder for families to make ends meet and for businesses to operate smoothly. In recent decades, the global trend has leaned toward international collaboration, with countries reducing protectionism and integrating economies. However, the current shift is moving away from this, as the focus now returns to individual countries and self-protection. Nationalism and economic security are taking precedence, with governments prioritizing domestic industries over global cooperation. As nations turn inward, the world is becoming more divided, with global cooperation diminishing and self-reliance rising. History demonstrates that a shift toward protectionism often precedes significant global conflicts. In the 1930s, the US enacted the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, leading to a cascade of retaliatory tariffs and a substantial decline in global trade. This economic isolationism is widely regarded as exacerbating the Great Depression and contributing to geopolitical tensions that eventually culminated in World War II. Similarly, earlier in the 1880s, the US faced the Pork War, where European nations banned American pork imports, leading to economic strain and strained diplomatic relations. These historical episodes underscore how protectionist policies can disrupt international trade, inflame nationalistic sentiments, and sow the seeds for broader conflicts. With all these economic shifts taking place, a crucial question arises. Could the current wave of protectionism and rising tariffs lead to conflict on a global scale, as it did in the years leading up to World War II? The impact of these tariffs on international trade, combined with rising nationalism, could intensify tensions between countries, much like the economic isolationism and trade barriers that deepened the global crisis in the 1930s. As history shows, protectionism often leads to a breakdown in diplomatic relations, creating an environment ripe for geopolitical conflict. So, what we're seeing isn't just an economic policy, it could be the trigger point for a larger global shift. As tariffs drive up costs and international tensions rise, the value of the dollar may weaken while real-world assets like metals, energy, and crypto become more desirable. It's a move that fits perfectly into Brandon's vision and suggests we might be entering a period of major financial transformation. As global cooperation fades, nations will need to adapt to a new economic reality with unpredictable consequences for the future. Let us know what you think. Is this the beginning of a new economic order, or just another round of global tug-of-war?